Hello, everyone. Welcome to our chat today. We are going to be going over some PMAD myths that need to be busted. So for anyone that might not know, PMAD stands for Perinatal Mood and Anxiety Disorders, and these are mental health challenges that folks face throughout their reproductive journeys. So I'm Meg. I'm joined by Michelle and the incredible Lacey, who is a therapist who specializes in perinatal mood, supporting parents, and she does an incredible job. She's in Texas, and she is here to help us bust some of these myths. So hi, Lacey.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on. I will say, yes, I'm from Texas, but even more so, I'm from Austin.
Yes. Oh my gosh, seriously. There's so many folks in our community from Texas. It is freaking incredible.
Great.
So for anyone also that might not know, Lacey also works with birth workers. So she really understands the kind of support that as doulas, as birth workers, that we provide, and how important it is that we know this information. So when we are supporting our clients, that we know that we're taking into account all aspects of their care, and especially, flagging anything if we think that there might be a PMAD going on, and we can connect to support and all of those good things. So, Lacey, let's dive right on in. Let's get in hot on this.
Yeah.
What is the most common myth that you would say that there is around PMADs?
One of the most common is that there's so many, but it only happens. Let's just start with one. That it only happens in the postpartum.
Yes.
That it only happens to a small amount of people. And to piggyback off that it only happens to people who have are women who identify as women or biologically sex as women, but it impacts a whole range of people, not just the birthing body, the person who is giving birth.
Yes. No, and I think it's so important. I remember, so I was diagnosed with antenatal depression with my oldest son. And at that point, I didn't know that depression in pregnancy was even a thing, right? You only hear about postpartum depression. And so antenatal depression was completely unheard of to me. And I made it my mission once I started doing birth work to make sure that everybody knew that this was a possibility, because I support so many parents that they might be in their second pregnancy. I see this a lot. And they might still be struggling with postpartum from their first birth, and they're pregnant now with another baby.
Right.
And so, right? So it's like the layering of how these things can impact so many experiences.
Yeah, so many people don't recognize that they can start to feel depression or anxiety, other things during pregnancy, especially those that are trying to conceive or having struggles with it. Their process might be a lot longer, and then feeling like, wow, I finally am pregnant, everything's going to be great, and then starting to experience this anxiety, right? Yes. Or maybe some trauma even from the experiences of trying to get pregnant, the different interventions. So it, kind of in that big statement I said, where there's lots of different layers to it. It can happen to anybody. It can happen at any time. And there's just definitely a high risk of it, just depending on different situations that are going into the process of getting pregnant. And even adoptive parents who are surrogates can experience these things during pregnancy, childbirth, and after.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I know so many people feel like this added pressure during their pregnancy or their postpartum, especially folks that have gone through a difficult reproductive journey to get pregnant, that they have this extra pressure that they need to be happy, or you're only supposed to be happy during this time. And it's like, Oh man, I wish that we didn't feel like that because life still happens. We're going through huge life transitions.
Right.
Like these are huge, huge changes, whether this is your first baby or your fifth baby. Um, like there's so much pressure. And yeah, I love that you're out there supporting folks, being like, you actually don't have to be happy if you're not happy.
Right, absolutely. It's still a big change. There still is this little thing coming into your life that you haven't known as long as you've known yourself. So it's
Yes.
an introduction of getting to know this person. And sometimes, I mean, I think that can be another myth in it as well, is that you, no matter your journey, you immediately fall in love with your baby the moment you have them, and
Yes.
you're still blissful. And if you don't connect or you don't bond or you have moments of like, what did I do, that there's something wrong with you, or that you're not quite prepared for this. Like, those are common amongst a lot of people, that it takes time to build that relationship and to feel adjusted. It's a constant adjustment. Some people will say the postpartum period is only a couple weeks. Some have even said, 6 months, right? And we're still expanding it to even a year and beyond, maybe
Yes.
to 2 years. And I feel like you said, Meg, there's so many aspects of pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum that stick with you for a lifetime.
Yep.
I was working with someone who her children are almost college age, and she said, I need to come and talk about my birth. I never processed it with anyone. And she's like, 17 years later, I'm still triggered by the things that happened.
Oh, I love that she like was able to identify that though.
Yeah.
It sucks suffering for that long, right? And holding that for so much time. But I know too that experience of the shame that can be around what they expect to happen after their baby is born. I really like that you touched on that, because it gets woven into, if you don't feel a certain way, again, this comes down to expectations. But if you don't, then you kind of feel shameful about it. So you like keep it real close to your chest, because you're like, well, everyone's going to think that I'm not a good parent, that I don't love my baby, that I'm not grateful, or for all of these things. And I don't know about you, Michelle, like, do you see this at birth, like with clients? Like, is this something that you talk about prenatally?
Yeah, I will tell them that even though you may feel expectation A is going to occur, we can't guarantee that. And I'll say, like, even in my births, I thought with my first, I was like, oh, I'll be fine. I had so much anxiety after my first child was born, incredible, overwhelming anxiety that was like almost crushing. At the time, I'm like, oh, no, this is normal. No, it was not normal.
No.
It was not normal. And this was a planned pregnancy.
Yeah.
And there's that myth that's like, no, you planned, so you shouldn't be worried.
Right.
I'm like, no, I was really concerned. And then I see that with my clients, so I try to expand to them, like, let them know, like, things might not go as you expect, or they might go better than you expect. It's like going with low expectations sometimes. And of course, typically my clients that I work with are very planned people. They're like, oh, I know what's going to happen. I'm like, that's great that you have this plan.
A good idea.
How you're going to feel, but planning emotions is very different than like birth planning. Planning your emotional response is so different. But no, like that's why I'm like, we got to get support early on and put things up early on. And like we mentioned, even folks who are going for fertility, get them that support so they can, no matter what happens, have care, know who they can reach out to. So if you're in Central Texas, reach out to Lacey here.
Yes, there's a lot of great organizations around here. My practice is expanding, and so people under me are all getting definitely trained in perinatal mood anxiety disorders, all the perinatal mental health. And there's a lot of great, nonprofit organizations around too that are involved to help families that may not have access to some financial, some help with that. That being the Pregnancy and Postpartum Health Alliance of Texas for people in the Austin area. So, and, one thing you said too is that you just thinking like there can be this grand plan and know like we have all of this. It's great to know. That will definitely help prepare you, and going through it can always feel so different. It's hard to wrap your head around exactly what will come up and what it'll be like. So I do have a lot of people who will come during pregnancy to start getting that, because they're like, I just don't know what's going to happen. When we talk about going back to the myths, You may think that someone who has a prior mental health diagnosis is the only person who is going to get or have a perinatal mood anxiety disorder. And that's, it's not true. Yes, that's going to increase the risk. So let's be prepared for it. And so those people can also not get them. And people who've never had anxiety or depression or trauma in their life can find themselves having one of these things that come up, So there's different things in the categories of PMADs. There's postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum PTSD or trauma, postpartum obsessive compulsive disorder, as well as postpartum bipolar disorder or postpartum psychosis, which all are very, a lot of them may have some of the same features, but they're also very different in a lot of ways. I think one of the biggest misconceptions too is a person who has postpartum, as a lot of people will call it, will think, oh, well, postpartum depression is the same as postpartum psychosis. That person wants to harm their baby. They're going to hurt their baby. And those postpartum psychosis is very rare. And there's a crucial amount of time in the postpartum that people want to have their eyes on someone within like the first 2 to 4 weeks. If they feel that there's, some statements that the birthing person doesn't quite seem like themselves, that they're not, kind of speaking in ways that make a lot of sense to other people, or they're saying things that indicate there might be some ideas of harm coming to the baby, either by someone else or at their own hands. And that's a time that we really do need to gather around that person and find some psychiatric help, because they are not themselves. There's something that's, going on that's causing a break from their thoughts and their reality. But it is way different than postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. So we want to be sure that we're not, stigmatizing any of these parents, but seeing the differences. Because the big fear and a reason that people won't talk about it is, if I say that I have any of these feelings, they're going to call somebody, they're going to call CPS, and they're going to come take my baby away. And that's the last thing that they want to happen. Even if they have moments of like, what did I do? Why did I do this? It's pretty normal to kind of question that, because it's really difficult. It's really hard. But so that's one thing I just want to, clarify for everyone. There's a big difference in those things, and really try to find a professional who understands these things. So you don't have to have that fear of like, oh, this person, I can't talk to them because they're going to call a hospital, or, we will do those things if we feel it's necessary to help, with the mental health. But it's really the last thing that any of us want to do. We want to try to help you through this. And so getting well-versed in these things, getting trained to understand the ins and outs of them, it's a very good thing to do.
Yes. Can you actually speak to, because this is something that I know Lacey sees all the time in her practice, Michelle and I both see it with clients, the clients having intrusive thoughts. And this is one of the flags that we really want to clarify. This is one of the really strong reasons why we want folks to find people trained in this, because when somebody isn't trained on intrusive thoughts, then more harm can come. So can you explain to everybody a little bit about intrusive thoughts?
So intrusive thoughts are really these, scary thoughts, what we can describe to our clients, the people we're working with. They're just very scary thoughts of bad things that could happen. Sometimes it may be something that feels rational. Sometimes it may feel irrational, like that may, is not likely to happen. But in someone's mind, the scary thought comes in, and it is really hard to push it away. No matter how hard they try to say, this isn't me, I don't want to think about it, it kind of keeps coming back. And I think it's, something that represents a fear, the anxiety, right, of what they have of something bad happening. And they're trying to either prevent it from happening or figure out a way to make it stop. And it just comes in this really like cruel form of our thoughts that it keeps replaying over and over.
So cruel.
Now, that can happen, right, with anxiety. That can happen with obsessive compulsive disorder. It also can happen, what we're watching for is in psychosis, postpartum psychosis. Now, the difference is, what we want to look for is if someone is saying, I have this really scary thought about, dropping my baby, or, someone kidnapping them. They're, even if it comes out of something bad happening to their baby at their own hands, they're saying, this feels so bad. I feel so shameful that I have this, or I'm terrified that I have this thought. that is an ego dystonic thought, meaning it doesn't match with them. It doesn't mean that's who they really are, right? What we're going to get a little more concerned about is an ego syntonic thought. One that maybe it still doesn't match the person of who they are, but when they're in a psychotic break, it is making more sense to them. So there may not be any thoughts around saying like, yeah, when I'm having this intrusive thought, it doesn't feel disturbing. To them, it actually seems like it's real, that it makes sense. So they're not thinking correctly. They're not thinking how they normally would. So that's the intrusive thought we're going to worry a little bit more about and say we need intervention. But with the, any of the intrusive thoughts, we can just kind of normalize that for people and say, yes, it's very common to have that because you're anxious. The anxiety also represents this attachment that you have, that you're wanting to care for this baby. So I'm sorry, it's really scary and coming in that form, but let's talk about, what to do about that. And one, just knowing there's nothing wrong with you, that's coming up for you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And there's there's so much shame around intrusive thoughts. People are so unlikely to actually share them with you. So it's so important that they know that this is actually, this happens. And I think one thing that is also important to flag is that for the person, so what I'm referring to right now, is somebody that has not in a psychosis. So this is somebody high anxiety or depression, but they're not in a psychosis, but their intrusive thoughts feel true. Even though they aren't how they actually want or what they want, it's still, your brain is so focused on it that you kind of assume that it must be the truth. If I'm thinking it, there's truth.
Yeah.
And so Lacey, I know Michelle and I say this all the time when we're teaching, is like, just because you have a thought doesn't make it true. And I was 26 years old before I learned that. I'm like, 26 years of believing all my thoughts. No wonder I was so tired. But right? So is that something that you find that you're kind of having to reiterate a lot to folks?
Absolutely. The thought doesn't make it true. And again, the way I'm, approaching it is it's kind of your brain on overdrive, your anxiety, your nerves on overdrive. And it's coming out in that way of saying, hey, how do we try to make it better? And so I just try to, bring out that point. It actually is representing a lot of love and concern that you have, and that it is so common, right? That it happens with so many people, especially, in those first few months when you're just don't know what's going on. And right. And, in the chat, Bianca's saying, right, because you're so tired, the sleep is a really huge indicator of, all the emotions that you might have being really intensified if you're not going on sleep. So if you're looking at a person with a lot of anxiety and they are not able to sleep when the baby sleeps, right? Because they're still worrying, maybe an intrusive thoughts like, oh, I have to worry about SIDS, or I need to go check and see if they're breathing, or if I leave them alone, something bad is going to happen. So they might not their body's not allowing them to sleep. So they're staying up, they're not resting, and it's kind of distorting a lot of thoughts, and those things keep coming in.
Absolutely. Catlin has shared that they had a really similar experience, that I'm a bad mom having intrusive thoughts. When really it was throw the baby. It was scary because she said it wasn't her, wasn't me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that just, how I approach it with people too is because, again, if someone's afraid to say it, I try to say, one thing that comes up for a lot of people I've worked with, and there's books written about intrusive thoughts and throwing the baby, dropping the baby, is saying, that's common. A lot of people, it may be thoughts like this, and it doesn't represent what they really want to do. Is that something that's come up for you? So I can kind of invite them to be able to talk about it. So that,
I love that
it's there, that I can say it's there for you. I don't want you to have to hold that alone. Bring that in. So,
I know.
And then working with them is definitely, that can take some time thereafter. It's great because it's very, distressful to have a constant flood of scary thoughts come in.
And plus,
go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Michelle.
I was gonna say, I think so too, at least for myself and those I've worked with, people that have intrusive thoughts always think they're always going to have intrusive thoughts. They feel like their PMAD or their thinking is untreatable. They can't get help. They can't go and seek out care. And I think too, there's combined with that is a stigma of help, of like, well, I got help, so I'm not strong enough parent, or I'm not a good enough. And it's like that enough. It's like, you are enough. Like you are doing so good just by considering the fact that I need help.
Right. Absolutely. That's such a great thing to point out to moms. There's so many, or, you know, birthing parents in general is just needing that reassurance, because there's no handbook. So we're all like, how do I know what I'm doing? And that parental guilt starts so early, where we take on everything and feel, oh, I made this decision, not that one, so everything's going to be screwed up forever. So it's good, yes, reassuring to let them know you're doing a good job. And the fact that you're thinking about this really represents like how hard you are trying. And I see Jeanette saying, you know, kind of about the books again, is like, I tell people, you know, this is a very common thing that a lot of people experience. In fact, that there's been many books written about it. That's how common it is. So they may have an intrusive thought. Is that something you've experienced? And just
opens the door so lovingly.
Yeah.
So
and the same with any suicidal ideation or thoughts. I kind of bring that up as well. That's not uncommon. I don't want you to sit alone with that. Sometimes it may be you just have an escape fantasy. Like, you know, we all have that. Sometimes we need a break and it feel like I can't do anything about it. And the mind just is like, well, maybe that. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's what you want to do. Right.
Yes.
So
can you speak to that a little bit more, actually? Because I think that is something that people never, ever get to hear about, especially in regards to suicidal ideation. And there is so much shame and like guilt around that thought in particular.
Yeah. That it, you know, when people are expressing that that's something they felt, and right, there's that shame and guilt, like, why am I thinking this? Or they're really scared by the thought that it got to that point. I really like to just work through with people and say, okay, again, is this something that you're really having a plan on and you're thinking that you want to do? Because there is a difference between an intentional plan. And then sometimes for a lot of people, it just is, you know, this sense of, I'm really overwhelmed. And that's what I tell people. I think that you're so exhausted and so overwhelmed that you're just not sure what else to do. So sometimes just with the intrusive thought, like our minds do this really weird thing that sometimes it thinks it's helpful by coming in with a thought. And then you're like, no, that's not what I want at all. Brain, let's step back.
Not for me.
And what's really going on here? So if we're able to have that conversation with people to maybe reduce that stigma, that shame and guilt that goes with it, they're more likely to talk about it and understand, okay, this may be coming up. And then you can encourage them to watch it. If the thoughts change in any way, if it does become something that you're thinking more and more about, or it's evolving into a plan or something specific that you're thinking about doing, yes, that's when we're going to talk about some other interventions if needed. But, you know, it's not uncommon for people to think like, I'm going to run out of here. I'm running away.
Yeah.
Or, I hear a lot of moms say things like, when I'm driving down the road, I just imagine like, what if the car flipped, or what if we got in an accident? That can be another intrusive thought, right? It's very scary. Doesn't necessarily mean it's you or what you want.
Yeah. And for anybody watching too, I think like everyone has intrusive thoughts. Like people generally have intrusive thoughts, but we don't, when we're mentally feeling really well, we don't typically assign meaning to them. But when we're not feeling well, like Lacey said, like when our anxiety is high or depression is high, then our brain assigns a new meaning to it. So as you know, somebody who is mentally well, you might be driving down the street and think, oh, what if I ran into that rock cut? And then you get your attention back on the road and you continue living your life. Whereas if you're not, then you might be like, holy shit, does that mean that I actually wanted to do that? And then, right. Yeah. No. Michelle,
yes.
What would you say as a birth worker? What are the things that you like to kind of like keep an eye out for when you're working with your clients? What are things that you really like to make sure that, you know, that people know about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things, I have a couple like mental health checklist, but physical health as well. I actually had a client who is an educator and is 6 weeks postpartum. And I checked in before school started again. And I said, okay, what's your eating looking like? Are you eating? They're like, well, I'm like, no. Are you eating? And they're like, well, I'm having a meal when my husband hands it to me. I'm like, okay, well, let's make sure that eating is important, because if you're going hungry before you even start back at work, that's going to cause issues. And then I'm okay, how are you sleeping? Like, well, I'm sleeping when I can. Okay, well, let's make sure sleep is a priority. Let's make sure hydration is a priority. Because if those 3 basic human needs are not on the list, no matter what is going to go on, the next things could get worse. So if someone's not finding joy in holding their baby, they're struggling to communicate with, whatever they need to sleep, they need to eat, they need to step away. If they're withholding from anybody else holding the baby, they're like, no, I can only care for the baby, nobody else can. Those are some big red flags that there's some thinking going on that could lead them down an unsafe path. And I also too will look at someone too, they may be seem fine, like, oh no, I'm eating, I'm drinking, but then you see that there's something going on. They may not want to disclose to you something. And so I'll say, I'm here to offer support. I want to make sure you can do that and talk to someone. So if you don't want to talk to me, that's when here in Austin, I usually give them PPHA's information so they can get mental health support. Because even though I've gone through their birth journey with them, they've got education with me, I still might not be the person they want to talk to about it. But I'm always like, let's just have an initial conversation with a mental health person, even if nothing's going wrong. Mm-hmm. And the first person I did that with, one of my very first clients, who was like a rock, was like, oh no, everything's great. About 6 months later, she was like, I had PTSD from my birth. I was untreated. And you just telling me go to call them was the best thing it could have done. And I was like, I knew something was up. Like, just this,
yeah.
They were like, oh, I'm fine. But there was just a little glimmer of like, something's not right.
Yeah.
And it's like a gut sensation. So like we always tell everyone to use brain, that my intuition said something's not right with them.
Yes.
And it was that there was, and of course the birth was traumatic, but they're like, oh no, it was fine. I'm fine. I'm like, if I talk to my therapist about your birth, I think you should see one too. That's also one of my big things I put in my calendar. Like if I leave a birth and I'm like, I need to make an appointment for it, I make sure that person especially gets even an initial appointment with someone. Just set up the conversation.
Yeah.
But those physical things really play into mental health big time if someone's not taking care of themselves. The same as well for partners. If the partner is really reluctant to hold baby, if they're really struggling with this transition, if they're feeling maybe, this goes for any kind of partner, unloved, unconnected, unable to communicate, if they're fearful, like they hold baby and they're just shaking the whole time, I'm like, you too could have PMAD. I'm like, what? I'm like, yes, you can have postpartum anxiety and be, identified male at birth. Like that's a thing. To let them know, go get some support and get some care, because we don't want anyone walking around feeling unsafe with their child or with themselves if there is no child. So.
Yeah. And a big indicator of partners, like I said, whether they're biological or if there's any assisted reproduction or adoption, any of this is a strong indicator of a non-birthing person getting a PMAD is if the birthing person has one themselves. So, I mean, and again, people can come in and we can tell these clients, like, you can just go talk to someone for a couple sessions. I have people who come in for 2 or 3 and they just need to talk through that initial shock of the adjustment. You don't have to be diagnosed with a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder in order to need services, because it's all part of an adjustment. This is a big, huge life transition, one involving lack of sleep and a loss of, you're still trying to figure out your identity. Again, you're this whole person all these years before you had that child, and now you're trying to figure out, what does it mean? How are you both at these things? So it's just good. I think it's important for everyone to share a birth story, no matter how that birth came to be. whether it was everything you envisioned it to be, to we had to try for a very long time, or we don't have familial support because they were against assisted reproduction, or they're in the LGBTQ community where, some people do unfortunately face that, where they don't have their own parental support in that, or of other people in community. It's just good to share your story, however that came to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Having someone witness that in whatever form, I recommend.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I just want to acknowledge too, there's lots of people sharing in the in the chat, and I know lots of folks in our classes and within this community, even just acknowledging your experience, showing up like you do is really, really powerful. We are seeing changes on how people experience and feel about mental health, and it might not be perfect yet, but it's damn better than it was 20 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And so I just really want to, I don't know, virtually high five, everyone that's doing this work, and Lacey that's dedicated her life's work to doing this, because it's making such a big difference.
Thank you.
And we know that there is actually 8 million things that we could say about it. We have so much more things that we would love to share with y'all. We have a workshop this Friday about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. It's shining a light on a silent pandemic. We're going to be talking about PMADs, as well as the lack of disclosure and racial disparity, because it's an incredibly important piece of this puzzle.
Yes, my former associate and colleague, Lacey will be joining me, and we'll be discussing, and that's a topic that's so important to us, perinatal mental health in general, but really pulling in that piece of racial disparities is something she and I are very excited to have the opportunity to speak about. And we really want people to join live if they can. I know there will be a recording afterwards to access if you can't, but we really hope to have a wonderful, good, deep discussion on these things and why people don't disclose. A lot of reasons that we talked about, fear, and then really seeing how people in marginalized communities have that fear even more, and how there's even more of a risk of developing perinatal mood anxiety disorder for having other things like discrimination, oppression, racial trauma, all those things coming into it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So if that is something that you want to hang out with us for and learn more from Lacey and Lexi, they're incredible. The link is in the chat box, so feel free to hop on there and go on over and register. So that's going to be happening Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's going to be 10 to 2:30. It's going to be really, really educational, informational, insightful. Like I said, we can't speak highly enough of Lacey and Lexi. And we'd love for you to come learn with us and hang out. So we're going to leave it at that. I know we could probably talk about this for hours and hours, which we will on Friday. But thank you so much for joining us, Lacey, Michelle. Thank you so much. Can't wait to hang out with you all. And Lacey, I'm so excited about Friday.
Yeah, great. I am too. I can't wait. And I will say before we hop off, if there's any other, myth that we came up with that we can quickly bust real quickly, I'm open to that. Yeah. I'm like, I know I want to say so much about it.
I know, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
So if anyone has a quick question, just let us know.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, can we tag you if somebody has a question in the...
Absolutely. Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Catlin, Bianca, Melina, Jeanette.
Jenny.
Jenny. Oh my goodness. Love it. Thank you all. And we will talk to you soon.
Yeah. See you.